Let's get over to Tristan Land with what we learned this morning. Tristan?
Yeah, Sheba, Eric, the constitutional protections for abortions that have been in place for nearly 50 years has come to an end. The Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade is expected to lead abortion bans in roughly half the states, and that means big changes to come here in Louisiana. Abortions will be illegal in Louisiana without exceptions for rape and incest. Governor John Bel Edwards recently signed what could be one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. Sponsored by Democrat Senator Katrina Jackson from Monroe, the new law expands on a trigger law that was adopted in Louisiana in 2006, clarifying that it includes exceptions of medical futility, meaning doctors believe the baby won't survive after birth, or if it's an ectopic pregnancy, meaning the fertilized egg implants outside of the uterus and could kill the mother. Senate Bill 342 could also send doctors who perform abortions to prison for 1 to 10 years. They would also face fines from $10,000 to $100,000. The bill also requires 2 physicians to determine if a pregnancy is medically futile. Right now, there are 3 abortion clinics in Louisiana. Since the trigger law is set to go into effect, the clinics have to shut immediately. The clinics have to shut down immediately. The bill does not ban birth control pills or emergency contraceptions. While it does not include rape or incest as exceptions, Governor John Bel Edwards said the bill clarifies that pregnancy and the life of an unborn child begin at implantation rather than fertilization. This allows the use of emergency contraception before a pregnancy can be clinically diagnosed. The governor also signed into law Senate Bill 388, which clarifies criminal penalties for anyone who distributes abortion pills. The ruling was made today by the Supreme Court's conservative majority, and a 6-3 vote. The decision to ban abortions now lies in the hands of the states. Sheba.
All right, thank you so much, Tristan. We want to get to Dr. Margaret Mary Downey with Tulane University School of Social Work this morning to join us. And thank you for joining us. Please tell us first your reaction to what we have learned this morning.
I believe you're muted right there. You might want to check your...
All right, guys, as you can see, we're trying to fix Dr. Downey's audio, but let's take a look at some of the reaction. Of course, this is news. We are getting reaction from all over the nation and the world right now. This is Attorney General Jeff Landry saying, breaking, this is victory for the unborn. U.S. Supreme Court has agreed with my position ruling. Roe v. Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood were both wrongly declared. Louisiana's trigger law banning abortion is now in effect. As Attorney General, I will defend it.
And this one from Mandy Landry, a state representative. Women are going to die. And this is a very emotional issue on both sides. Those who are pro-life are just hell-bent and determined on their views, and those who say a woman has the right to choose are hell-bent and determined on their views.
Sure, and as you see these passionate reactions coming in across the screen, this is such a historic decision. For nearly 50 years in America, women had a constitutional right to have an abortion. They were federally protected. That has ended today.
Yeah, and President Obama had tweeted about this. He said almost 50 years of proven law, of codified law have just been eliminated. The Advocate has an article about what it means and doesn't mean for Louisiana, because Louisiana is one of those states that has a trigger law, so it goes into effect immediately. Governor Blanco had signed that into the trigger law back in 2006. The new laws, the new law that was signed by the governor, have changed some of that. It's a little less restrictive than the law in 2006, the trigger law, but it's still very restrictive.
It is very restrictive. And it doesn't allow exceptions for incest or rape.
Yeah, what it does and doesn't do. All right, let's take a look at former President Obama's tweet. Today, the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it regulated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. And we saw Speaker Nancy Pelosi just in the House speaking about it. Very emotional.
Emotional, yeah, this reaction we're getting from everyone.
Yeah, and she was saying just you know, this really this really is hard on a woman's right to choose. I mean, she was very emotional about it. As we said, the emotions on both sides are very strong.
Yeah, for many women in the country, that right is now gone. All right, we want to get back to Dr. Margaret Mary Downey with Tulane. I know we were having some issues hearing you earlier. Can you hear us now?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes,
As we've been saying, such passionate reactions to this, understandably. What's your reaction?
I'm frankly outraged, and I think social workers everywhere are outraged. We know that approximately half of the people who access abortion are below the federal poverty line. So the people who access abortion are our clients, our patients. And as social work is positioned to support and empower the most marginalized, criminalized in our society, this just makes our job that much harder, to say the least, of the harm that is happening and going to happen to poor people, to people of color, to people who are already criminalized.
Yeah, you immediately bring up the economics of this, because the conversation that's happened ever since we learned of that draft report thinking that Roe v. Wade would be overturned, and it has, people have been saying that people with money will still be able to travel and get an abortion. As we said, 13 states, including Louisiana, had laws in place that have banned it. They've said about 26 states will ban or restrict it in some way. So this does affect poor women more than women who have more resources.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at the cost of gas right now, and imagine having to extremely quickly come up with the cash to travel to a clinic if you can get an appointment in time, if you have the resources to have a working, reliable phone to continue to call to make appointments. So I want to, reiterate that, again, almost half of the people who access abortion are below the federal poverty line. And we know as social workers that the federal poverty line doesn't even begin to capture the
burger, everything. We're gonna have a good time.
Okay, great.
We're gonna have a great time.
All right, guys, we're having some audio issues
okay.
here.
Now we're back with Ms. Downey.
And then, how do we pronounce that last name?
All right, Dr. Downey, can you still hear us?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry for that interruption there.
Yeah.
But
It's okay. I just wanted to reiterate how one of the things that social workers know intimately is that the federal poverty line does not even begin to capture the levels of deprivation, material and physical in our society. So when we say that almost half of the people who access abortion are below the federal poverty line, that's one thing. That doesn't, again, begin to capture people experiencing, acute crises, financial, familial, and otherwise, that will prevent them from being able to access abortion, even if they can, get an appointment on the books in another state. So think about having, childcare, for instance.
Yeah.
We don't have universal childcare in this country.
And
needing to get
I don't mean to interject, but I was reading an article about an abortion clinic that's just over the border in Texas and Mexico, and they're now seeing in a month what they used to see in a year of Americans coming over for an abortion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, there are so many people, social workers included, on the front lines right now, scrambling to facilitate access to abortion as a personal right, as a human right, as healthcare. And it creates so much of an overburden on those frontline healthcare workers, those frontline social service workers. Again, to say the least, of the people who are harmed by not being able to access abortion, the families who are harmed. But I just want to reiterate, if you are a social worker, if you are in healthcare right now, think of how much this is honestly workplace issue for you. That the fact that this overturning of Roe v. Wade has created a landscape where social workers are now needing to scramble through these Byzantine, overburdensome policies, regulations, laws, supporting people in traveling between states and countries, when we know that abortion is a safe and common procedure and could happen in someone's community, could be fully franchised.
And the argument always boils down to a woman's right to choose, and those on the other side who are saying a human life should be respected at all costs. And even Governor John Bel Edwards, who has been a pro-life advocate all his career, thought the leaving out the exceptions for rape and incest was just kind of, I think he said mean-spirited.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of responses to that. I think that there are moral, ethical conversations to be had. Perhaps you can tell by my name that I am Irish Catholic, and I am pro-abortion, enthusiastic about abortion because of my Catholicism and not in spite of it. So there's no way that you can claim, oh, I am from this religious background, this cultural background, this sort of theoretical or moral tradition, therefore I can't support abortion. That's a really complex conversation for those who are in those spaces to have, but that should not prevent every person who can get pregnant in this country from choosing to parent or not with dignity. So I actually don't think it's about just a woman's right to choose.
And
it's about fully supporting people to parent or not with dignity.
I just want to put some numbers in here for context. According to the CDC, there's about 600,000 abortions each year. In Louisiana in 2020, there were about 7,000 abortions. So just to give you a picture of how many women this will be impacting, what do you see for the health, for the safety of women who still want to seek an abortion? As you said, many who will not be able to afford it. What do you see for the future of that? A rise in the use of birth control? I know Plan B is still legal, or dangerous and illegal practices to still try to abort a baby.
Sure. So I think people are going to, again, face increasing debt and financial crises in order to access abortion. I think people are going to explore self-managing abortion, which is totally in line with the social work code of ethics, self-determination and dignity for all persons. However, we know that self-managing abortions is increasingly criminalized. So I think people are going to be facing the surveillance, policing, and criminalization by the state for trying to manage their fertility. And I think, from the social worker side of things, we have these incredibly vague, often contradictory policies and regulations. Governor Edwards' recent statements conflate conception and implantation in a really problematic way. So I think we're just going to see people who are already struggling face continued deepening crises: physical, mental, economic, familial. I'll just wrap up quickly and say that the Turnaway study is one really seminal work that shows that the consequences of being denied a wanted abortion, so they followed 1,000 women, the consequences of being denied a wanted abortion are extreme in regards to a person's physical, mental health, educational attainment, economic prospects, and quality of life.
And if you go by the polling, we just had CBS News on a little while ago. They were talking about a CBS poll they did. The majority of people did not want the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's not just a CBS poll. It's been a number of polls that have been done for years, and then especially after this leak about the ruling that came down today, that most people, most Americans, did not agree with overturning Roe v. Wade. And in fact, when all the latest appointees to the Supreme Court were questioned during their Senate confirmations, they all said that Roe v. Wade was codified law.
And we're taking a live look in Washington, D.C. right now. As we said, passionate reactions all across the nation this morning. This is, of course, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. We cannot hear what she's saying, but obviously responding to this morning's news. And we're monitoring what's happening in D.C. At 11:30 this morning, President Joe Biden is expected to speak about the Supreme Court's decision.
And as we said, it's been emotional. I mean, we saw the scenes outside the U.S. Supreme Court. one of the reporters for CBS was saying, I mean, there were people crying on both sides.
Right.
People who were pro-life and those who were pro-choice. It just is such an emotional issue, and I think a lot of people just did not foresee this ever coming, because, as we said, when most people are questioned before the Senate when they're up for confirmation for the Supreme Court, they always say that this is law. It's the law of the land. It's codified.
Sure, and this is one of the few times that we've seen something being deemed a constitutional right being taken away. So, Dr. Downey, we'd like to work you back into the conversation here. I think this is so emotional because it speaks to larger than the 600,000 women a year who get an abortion. It really speaks to women's rights and what society thinks of women.
Absolutely, and it's everyone's rights, because this law, and I'm not a legal expert, but I can just say from the social work, again, perspective, and someone who was an abortion doula, which is a non-medical support person for abortion, it creates an environment, a legal environment and legal precedent for, issues of privacy, a personal relationship with your doctor, to be compromised and overturned by the Supreme Court. So it's really a decision that impacts everyone, and again, compromises that social work code of ethics around self-determination, justice, and dignity for all persons.
And I was watching a pundit earlier this morning talking about what she had witnessed. She said she had talked to a number of people in Louisiana and Mississippi who say they now will have to travel hundreds of miles if they choose to get a legal abortion somewhere. And again, we're talking about the morality of this, and it is hard because so many people do not like abortion. However, they reasonably think in many cases that do they have the right to tell a woman what to do with her body?
That's one stance for sure. And I think there's other stances where people might reply to a poll in a certain way. And when it comes to their own lives or their partner's life, their family's lives, they make a different decision. So as an abortion doula, and again, I'm a Catholic woman. I saw many people who were, before I got here, I was quote unquote anti-choice. And now that I know what this is like, I am here accessing abortion despite feeling complicated about it. I think I just want to reiterate how much this is going to impact people who are already struggling to get childcare, healthcare, to just get a modicum of economic security in this, incredibly turbulent, exploitative economic time. That's what we see as social workers. And as a last point, I just want to clarify that I think anti-choice is a much better frame than pro-choice, or rather pro-life, because pro-life would actually be a society where we address the maternal mortality rates in Louisiana and Mississippi and the US more broadly, where we address the lack of childcare, where we addressed food shortages. So pro-life doesn't actually capture what's going on, and anyone who claims to be pro-life but doesn't support, healthcare, childcare, education, nutrition, who would force a person to keep a pregnancy to term in this society, cannot reasonably be called pro-life, in my opinion.
And that's one of the arguments a lot of people have made, that you're pro-life while the fetus is still in the womb, but then when it is born, then in many cases, you're kind of on your own then.
Yeah, not just on your own, but, again, for a lot of poor women, Black women, Latino women, criminalized for a lot of the parenting choices that you make. Social workers are often employed in child protective services, and we know that Black and brown children, Black and Indigenous children, I should say, are disproportionately represented in the CPS population, the child welfare case population. And that's because of systemic racism in the child welfare system. So it's not just left alone, it's policed and criminalized for your parenting, when white and more privileged families would be perhaps left alone, perhaps even actively, supported.
Sure. You brought up maternal mortality, which of course Louisiana is one of the states with the worst maternal mortality rates.
And you looked into that very
yeah,
deeply.
which is another aspect of this conversation, a larger conversation that you've been bringing up about healthcare, about forcing a woman to carry a baby if she chooses not to. She doesn't have that choice anymore in Louisiana. But
And in many other states.
Yeah, and as you brought up, maternal mortality is a huge issue. If you're not going to provide services and make sure that society is giving women what they need to carry their babies to term healthily, now you're forcing them to have a baby, and a lot of these women are dying having babies.
Absolutely. Black women in Louisiana are about 3 times more likely than white women to die in pregnancy-related circumstances, so up to a year after childbirth. And that is due to a number of factors, but it really boils down to the fact that we do not actually have a life-affirming social service and healthcare system. And that is especially, wrapped up in that conversation is the systemic racism built into that.
Yeah, we should also make clear Louisiana's new law on abortion does still provide that exception if a woman's life is at risk.
Yeah.
But I've also been reading from some experts that this is going to make doctors more afraid to decide if a woman's life is at risk, because doctors can now face 1 to 10 years in prison if they perform an abortion that is not because a woman's life was at risk. So it seems even more complicated for doctors as well.
And as you're saying, it was a complicated issue before. It's gotten 10 times more complicated now because of some of the penalties if a doctor performs an abortion, or even if somebody from out of state sends abortion pills into the state. That's
right.
Illegal now.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's not just physicians who are actually performing the abortions. It's the medical social workers, it's the social service case managers, who might be criminalized for aiding and abetting abortion when they are actually just trying to follow their code of ethics and navigate this, again, incredibly contradictory set of codes. So I think it's really a time for all of these essential workers, social service and healthcare, to band together and say that we are not going to stand for this for ourselves as well as our patients. Never mind the fact that a lot of people who are physicians and are social workers get abortions ourselves.
I think it's also important to remember that at one point in the legislative session, we saw some lawmakers want to see women who got abortions face criminal charges. So it just makes you wonder legally how far this will go.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen incredibly terrifying circumstances where people, for self-managing abortion in the context of not being able to access it in a clinical setting. In Texas, for example, there was that recent case. And this has been going on for decades. So I think it's really important to remember, it as a way of perhaps offering some hope on this dark day, that people across the country have been strategizing to address the criminalization, the harm, the fear, the oppression that people who go to access abortion are facing. Again, particularly for Black, Indigenous, people of color. There are people who saw this coming, and there is a lot of foundation, for those who are outraged.
Yeah, well, Doctor, thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Downey, we appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking with us and for your insight on the impact this will have on our nation, on healthcare, on women, and especially those who are in economically stressful situations.
All right, and we now have on the phone Sharon Hewitt, a pro-life senator from Slidell. Senator, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Do you see this as a big victory today?
Yes, it is a big victory. I mean, Louisiana has been one of the most pro-life states in the country, and we have laws in place that are set to trigger where most abortions will be illegal in Louisiana. We were really just waiting for the Supreme Court to finally take action as they did today.
Yeah, you were behind one of the laws to prevent women from getting abortion-inducing drugs. Can you kind of take us through these laws? I know since 2006, there have been laws in place in Louisiana that would make abortion illegal once these federal restrictions were dropped, which of course happened today. Kind of take us through what Louisiana law now says about abortion.
Well, Louisiana law now basically says abortions are illegal in Louisiana, except in the case of saving the life of the mother. We have put a number of laws on the books over the years to, continue to strengthen our abortion laws. We passed two significant pieces of legislation in this last session. One was by Senator Katrina Jackson, which basically provided criminal penalties for those that performed abortions in Louisiana, and it reorganized basically and cleared up a lot of our statutes because we've been legislating on this now for nearly 50 years, and some of our definitions were conflicting. The other thing that we did, and this is the bill that I authored, Senate Bill 388, is it basically criminalizes those companies that are sending mail-order, do-it-yourself abortion pills into Louisiana. These are very dangerous for women. They need to be working under the care of a doctor. And so I believe that with abortion now being illegal, the mail-order abortion pill, black market, could potentially become a problem. And we want to penalize those that are sending pills into our pregnant moms.
And Senator, that's different from the Plan B medication.
That is specifically accepted out of law, the legislation. So Plan B is still legal. Contraceptives are still legal. Those are all things that are still options, for women who become pregnant. What we're talking about are pregnancies that are much further along, right. Abortion pills that, again, jeopardize the health of the mother in the process of doing that. And so that's what we're trying to manage. We want those to be done, if there is a case for that, for it to be done under the care of a doctor and not just some mail order, do-it-yourself kind of operation.
And Governor Edwards has always been pro-life, but he thought that the bill that was passed that had no exception for rape or incest, he did not think that was a correct decision.
Well, the current law, as he pointed out correctly, the current law has no exceptions right now for rape or incest. And the bill that we passed this session really kind of reorganized the deck chairs in terms of our abortion laws. Whether he had, signed or vetoed that bill, it was not going to affect the rape or incest exceptions. That was an amendment that was considered on the House floor that did not pass. It has been debated, over the years. And I think with Plan B pills, that is an option in those horrible, horrible situations that don't require an abortion, but would give those in those situations another option.
And there was a move early on in one of the committees to try and criminalize the mother for an abortion. That did not pass.
That was never the intent. There was some discussion that you could interpret it that way in the bill that was proposed, in my bill actually, that language was, maybe subject to interpretation. And we clarified that through an amendment. That was never our intent. And it has never been our intent to criminalize the pregnant mothers.
You brought up jeopardizing the health of the mother when you talked about those abortion pills, which are now illegal. We just spoke with an assistant professor of social work at Tulane who was speaking about the health of mothers, the health of women who are seeking abortions. And she saw it from a different perspective, saying that many women who want an abortion will still seek one, but in more dangerous conditions. Are you concerned about the health of women from that perspective?
Well, that certainly is a fear. You know, some women find themselves in desperate situations. They have life circumstances that make it difficult, you know, for them to imagine having a baby. But, you know, part of what we need to do now is invest in educational programs and resources so that women know that they do have options to either parent or to give their baby up for adoption. And, you know, many women just don't know that there are options out there. And so we need to do a better job. We did add several $1 million of state funding this year in this last legislative session for programs along those lines, but we need much more.
And this change takes effect immediately here in Louisiana.
I'm sorry, Eric, say it again.
This takes effect immediately in Louisiana. That trigger law is now on the books. It is law now.
Yes, it is law. It is, you know, it's predicated on the overturning of Roe, and you know, we believe that basically happened today.
Yeah, and as we said, I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and the emotions are running so high on both sides. You know, I mean, do you see there any kind of a backlash on this at all from either side?
Well, you know, of course, I think regardless of how the Supreme Court ruling would have come down, it is emotional on both sides, as you say. And, you know, there's always going to be a side that's unhappy. But this is the highest court in the land. This is the end of the road for the legal issues. I believe this case is settled. It's up to the states now, and Louisiana is well positioned, I think, to move forward in working to save babies and to protect women.
Well, playing devil's advocate, you know, most of the nominees for the Supreme Court during their hearings said that they believed that Roe v. Wade was settled law. No, it's not. Well, you know, there will be, I'm sure, lots of litigation going forward, you know, in all of the states, as everyone kind of dives into what each of our state statutes say. And so, you know, I guess maybe in some ways this is never settled. But I do think that in the short term, the abortion clinics in Louisiana will be shutting down. And, you know, we will be working again to provide more resources for pregnant women to help them know that there are really other options.
Yeah, the abortion clinics, as you mentioned, 3 are in our state, were in our state. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport will all be required to close now. But yeah, as you were kind of mentioning, this is the law as of today. Were you surprised, though, by this happening? For 50 years, nearly 50 years, this has been a constitutional right. It is not often that we see a constitutional right invalidated or taken away. I understand that this ruling is in favor of the laws that you were pushing for in our state, but were you surprised? Did you expect it to happen?
Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised because so many states like Louisiana put trigger laws in place. So clearly I believe it was the will of the constituents in these states that were speaking at the state level about their views on abortion. And it was just a matter of time, I think, before the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, acted. And they basically said that there is not a constitutional right to an abortion. And that's what we believe. We believe that babies have rights. And this is a great day, I believe, for Louisiana.
Well, and when you talk about constituents, most polls, including one they just showed on CBS News and another one done recently by a university, say that overwhelmingly Americans did not want to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Well, you know, every state is different. Again, we are a very conservative state in Louisiana, And I do believe that this is the will of the people in Louisiana, as evidenced by the number of pro-life bills that we have passed, over the last 49 years, and a number of significant bills since 2006.
And again, it's a hard one to wrap your head around, because many people thought this would never be overturned. People like you have worked very hard, and fervently believe that a baby's life is sacred and should be saved.
Well, that's right. I mean, who else is going to advocate for the babies? And so, and we do care about pregnant women. We want women to be safe. And, some of these abortions that have been happening, of course, have been horrific. And I think, quite honestly, so many cases, women find themselves in situations where they feel desperate. And I understand that. And so, again, it's our responsibility to step up and to make sure that we surround women with options and resources and help them, because for many people, they don't see any other way. And we just need to do a better job. There's so many families, loving families, that want to adopt. And I think this is going to be, an opportunity for babies to find loving homes, and for families to have an opportunity to adopt babies right here in Louisiana.
And the Supreme Court ruling today sets this for states' rights. The states can make their decision. And a lot of people who are arguing about some kind of hypocrisy, they're saying, okay, it's up to the states to decide on what they want to do with abortion. It's up to the federal government to take care of gun laws, things like that.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, Eric, and so I can't necessarily get into the. I can't necessarily defend, the logic and the arguments and all of that. But, gun laws, that is a Second Amendment. That is the U.S. Constitution. There is not anything in the U.S. Constitution related to abortion. And so for me, that is kind of the difference, and the reason why the Supreme Court rightly has said this is a state issue, and it's up to the states to develop laws that are responsive to their constituents.
And that was what the Supreme Court did say today in the majority ruling, that it's not a constitutional right, that it's not in the Constitution, as is the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, that states have the ability to make their own decisions.
Well, again, it's a happy day. I know for many of us. Again, for others, I know it's very emotional, and it's very disappointing. This has been, an issue that people have been arguing over for 50 years. And so, we have to find a way to come together, to work together, to take care of babies and to take care of moms.
All right, Senator Hewitt.
One more question for you, Senator Hewitt, while we have you, because we know some of the national conversations have been talking about in vitro fertilization and other ways that families go about having babies. Do our Louisiana laws restrict that in any way or speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think all of that is still available. I think that's all legal in Louisiana. I'm not aware of anything that we've done to prohibit that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying
Senator, thank
that.
you very much. We appreciate your time today.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you for being with us. We are also hearing from State Representative Mandy Landry, who is on the other side of this argument from Senator Hewitt. She is pro-choice. Here's her latest reaction.
Mandy, just your quick reaction to the Supreme Court decision.
I started sobbing in the car, and I mean, the gut reaction is more women are going to die in Louisiana from this. Those coat hanger stories are real. We're really worried women are going to hurt themselves, because in Louisiana, with the 3 clinics closed, the closest state is Illinois if you want to seek an abortion. New Mexico, California, New York, not that many people are going to be able to fly out there. If you're watching, contact Jane's Due Process or National Network of Abortion Funds, and they can help you get there. But the fact is, since over half of women who have an abortion have children, and they choose to have one for economic reasons, they're not going to be able to go anywhere else. They're not going to be able to take off work or leave the kids. And with our maternal death rate being the highest or second highest in the country, we know that's going to lead to more deaths. It just will. It's a fact.
What does this ruling mean for Louisiana?
All 3 abortion clinics are now closed. They closed the minute the decision came down. We have a trigger law from 2006, our only female governor signed. That was reaffirmed this year. They're closed. If they perform any abortion care, they go to jail, get arrested, fined heavily, they're closed.
And what does the trigger law say in Louisiana?
It says that if Roe v. Wade is overturned or similar cases, that the clinic's immediately closed. It's pretty blunt.
In terms of exceptions?
So the exceptions are life of the mother, which are pretty narrow. It has to be, you're literally on death's door. It has to be a physical ailment, not a mental, like if you're suicidal or schizophrenic or anything, that's not a reason. It has to be the life of the mother. If the baby is medically futile, meaning it's not going to make it after birth, you need 2 doctors to sign off on that. It's really limited. Physicians are freaked out about it. They don't want to go to jail for 10 years. And in my opinion, they're going to leave more women without having the abortion because they're afraid they're going to go to jail. Rightly so, because some of them will. And it's just going to lead to more deaths right away.
And as you can tell by Representative the representative's statement.
Yeah, Mandy Landry.
That the lines are drawn. There just seems to be no middle ground on this.
Yeah.
And it's just such an emotional issue.
She spoke out a lot against this while the state legislature was debating it, and she said the same thing over and over. Her take is that more women will die. Yeah,
and we are getting more reaction about the Supreme Court's decision today. Alana Odoms of the ACLU of Louisiana says, quoting now, "The Supreme Court ruling is an unprecedented attack on women's rights and reproductive freedom. After today's decision, Louisiana politicians are getting ready to turn back the clock nearly 50 years on our fundamental rights and force women and everyone who can become pregnant into a second-class status. Make no mistake, these politicians won't stop here. The same anti-abortion extremists seeking to control the bodies of pregnant people, they're coming for our right to access birth control and gender-affirming care, marry who we love, and vote," end quote. Now, on that, we did hear from, on some of the coverage today from CBS, that Justice Alito, in his decision, said that this is clearly just about this alone. The only one who said it may go a little further than that was Justice Thomas. Yeah. But none of the other justices signed on to his version of the opinion. They did sign on to Justice Alito's.
That's right. We were just getting reaction in from Mayor LaToya Cantrell as well. Here's what she had to say, that this ruling strikes down a half-century of precedent, settled law, and most importantly, access to safe and responsible medical care for millions of women. A half-century of women empowered to make their own health care decisions has now been tossed away by a half-dozen activists, fundamentalist Supreme Court justices obsessed with driving a political agenda. A half-century of women being able to access safe medical care who now find themselves at risk of bodily harm and even death as this ruling reopens the back alley for business. And again, that's Mayor LaToya Cantrell responding to today's Supreme Court ruling.
All right, we're also hearing from House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. He has said, quote, "This historic ruling for life is a day to celebrate, and after we celebrate this victory, pro-life Americans across the country will continue our work in legislative bodies to encourage a culture that protects life." That's a quote from Steve Scalise. Thanks to decades of hard work from pro-life movement, Roe v. Wade will no longer hinder the elected leaders of the people from protecting innocent lives, life in America. The quote from Steve Scalise.
And then U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy weighed in, saying today's decision recognizes that an unborn child has a right to life. In a statement, he said, quote, "Being pro-life means being pro-mothers, pro-babies, and pro-healthy futures, a philosophy I carry with me in the Senate. This is a deeply emotional issue for many Americans, no matter which side one stands, but it is now up to individual states to enact their own policies."
The Supreme Court ruling was a 6-3 ruling. The conservative justices ruling in favor of overturning Roe, including Chief Justice John Roberts, although he said he didn't agree with some of the things that were in the measure. he thought Roe should stay, but he did go along with the other justices. The 3 liberal justices voted against it.
All right, and we are joined now by Robert Wesley, a constitutional law expert at Tulane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, let's also remind people that this ruling came down in 298 pages. So, of course, experts are still combing through the specifics here, but kind of tell us your reaction and from a legal perspective, what happened here?
Well, I was just reading the opinion before I came on to your show, and I clearly had not had a chance to read everything. It's a very long opinion, and there are also a dissent in this opinion.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that the Chief Justice, he only signed on to the judgment. He did not sign on to the majority opinion by the 5 other conservative justices.
Yeah, we were just pointing that out. That was interesting to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I think he had set a different path where incrementally there would be changes made in the protection of abortion. This is simply rids the court of any control over what the states might do with respect to abortion, which is very, very troubling.
And let me ask you this, when we saw the recent hearings for the 3 latest Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch, Coney Barrett, and Kavanaugh, they all said in their hearings and said it to many senators that they thought Roe v. Wade was settled law. Apparently it was not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there's a lot of half statements and ambiguous statements that people make in the context of these hearings that are never really challenged or gone into any significant depth, at least in the public discussion. So simply agreeing that it's settled law, well, it's settled until it's unsettled.
Yeah.
And
Right.
now it's unsettled.
And what I've been reading, though, that there's very few times that we've seen constitutional rights, though, overturned.
This is the first time.
Oh, wow.
This is the first time. This is a precedent, and that's another aspect of this, which is so troubling, is that this now sets a precedent for taking away constitutional rights.
Although the majority opinion said that this was not something guaranteed into the Constitution, like freedom of speech or the Second Amendment. They're saying that this should be done by the states, and that was their logic for overturning Roe v. Wade.
Well, I've heard a lot of conservative politicians this morning talking about how this decision protects life, but the Constitution actually protects not only life, but it also protects liberty. And my understanding of the abortion right was that the abortion right was protected under the liberty portion of the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. And so, one side celebrates protection of life, another side bemoans the attack on liberty, but the Constitution protects both.
And as you just mentioned, this is unprecedented in that constitutional rights have been overturned. Also unprecedented in that leak draft report that we saw in May that told us that this was going to happen. And now it has. Of course, that is being investigated. But talk about from that aspect when we've seen, if we've ever seen, a prediction of what would happen, and it actually happens. A draft report telling us that this would happen, that was leaked to the public.
I'm not sure of all of the precedents that may be out there. I do know that there have been times in the past where conversations have happened between justices and politicians about how they were planning to rule. For instance, the last time I remember this happening was with the Dred Scott decision, where the court actually forecast to the president that they were going to settle the slavery issue in Dred Scott. Of course, that decision led to the Civil War.
Yeah, and let's talk about the legality of this and the constitutionality. This now goes to the states. They all can decide. So abortion has not been outlawed federally. It just is not legal federally anymore.
Well, it's not constitutionally protected, and so
Right.
the states will have the ability to say whether or not they're going to permit it and under what conditions. And there are no conditions that are off limits. So if the states decide that they will not protect women who have been raped, then they won't be protected. If they decide they won't protect women who are victims of incest, then they won't be protected.
And
If
that's
they
the case
decide-
in Louisiana.
Right, exactly. So I mean, there are no limitations, and what's absolutely shocking to me, as you know, just a legal analyst, is that the court dismisses out of hand the idea that some of these abortion laws are sex-based discrimination. They say it's not sex-based discrimination.
And the other thing, when we were talking to Senator Hewitt from Slidell, who authored Bill 388 about abortion pills, she said that you know, we're a very conservative state, and that this is now the law of the land. But when you see most polls, and I haven't seen any polling on Louisiana specifically, but most national polls overwhelmingly said that Americans did not want the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
That's right. They're completely out of step with the public opinion in this country on the issue. Most people wanted some version of Roe to be upheld, and there was some disagreement about how much freedom people should enjoy in this respect. But reproductive rights is something that the vast majority of Americans want protected.
And reproductive rights is something we see fought about over and over again. While we have you and we have some time, can we go back to how this even all got started to get to the point where Roe v. Wade was overturned? Of course, for nearly 50 years, women had federal protection for abortion. And then we have this Dobbs versus Jackson case, which I think a lot of times for the general public, it goes over their heads what we've been talking about with that. Dobbs is the state health officer in Mississippi. Jackson represents their only abortion clinic, or was their only abortion clinic, and Mississippi wanted to ban abortions after 15 weeks, so it led to this case. But this is not new. This is a 2-year-long process of appeals and all of that stuff.
And we knew this was going to be a test
case.
Yeah.
So can you kind of start from the beginning so folks understand how we even get here?
Well, you know, the litigation has its own history, but and I'd be happy to talk about that. But I think that we don't get this decision without what happened during the Obama administration, when Senator McConnell refused to even give President Obama's nominee for an open Supreme Court vacancy a hearing.
Because he said it was too close.
Wait until the election.
He said it was too close to the election. It was about a year away. Then he did a complete 180 when it came to Coney Barrett.
That's exactly right. So when Justice Ginsburg died suddenly during the Trump administration, we didn't get a chance to wait until the election was over before a nominee was, and we were actually even closer to the election than we were during the Obama years. So that's how we get today's decision, is that once there was a supermajority of conservatives on the court, they were bound and determined to overturn Roe. They've been wanting to do it for years and years, and they never had a sufficient majority to do that.
And you know, we hear from
they still would not, and they still would not without the death of Justice Ginsburg.
And we hear, you know, politicians say all the time, elections have consequences.
That's exactly right. This is now a Trumpian court, and it's not only abortion rights that are under attack. You know, that's probably the most earth-shattering decision of this term of the court. But the gun decision also was fairly earth-shattering. I mean, something that by the explicit language of the Constitution is not an individual right is now being treated as an individual right. And the states are not allowed to place restrictions on where people conceal carry.
And let's talk about this. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about some of the other ramifications people are worried about. They're worried about the same-sex marriage, things like that. Justice Alito, in his opinion, said that this was a narrow opinion just on Roe v. Wade, on abortion. He said it wouldn't go to other cases. However, Justice Thomas said that in his written opinion that it could go to other cases, but apparently he stands alone on that.
Well, he may stand alone at the moment, but I would not place a lot of trust in this particular court's pronouncements about what they will and will not do. Because as you pointed out, during the Senate confirmation hearing, all of them said that they respected the court's precedent, that it was settled law, and then once they had their supermajority, they rushed to overturn the constitutional right that they disagreed with. So I don't trust them. I think that we have to be vigilant and we have to be prepared that this court may attack additional rights, even things that people take very much for granted, like the ability of married couples to use condoms, could be attacked by this court.
What's also so interesting, knowing that the Supreme Court is really deciding what the Constitution says, their interpretation of the Constitution. And so essentially today's decision is that the Constitution does not guarantee a right to an abortion. But as you mentioned, the reading of that Constitution is drastically changed by who is on the court. So it begs the question, if the court were to be a liberal majority again, will we see this flip in the future?
I think we very well could be. I mean, I think that, the court likes to try to hold itself out as neutral and above politics. Right. But politics clearly plays a role in how they rule. And right now we have a conservative imbalance on the court, that we have a supermajority of very conservative justices. And that's, again, as a result of the Senate Republicans playing games and not allowing President Obama his choice for replacement of Justice Scalia when Scalia died. And
speaking of a political court, and we're hearing more and more people talk about the politics of the U.S. Supreme Court. And, we've seen Justice Thomas's wife was very deep in the Stop the Steal movement with President Trump trying to keep his presidency intact. The leak, and then just other things that have just become, it seems that it's become very politicized in a way that I don't remember it being this politicized.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it has become very politicized, and I think that the thing that prevents that is when there really is balance on the court, and it's out of balance right now. We have too many conservative justices and not enough liberal justices. And, I understand that, people also, their views evolve over time. Someone could start out being very conservative and become more liberal over time.
And we have seen that.
And I've seen it as well. But it just right now it's imbalanced, and it's going to stay that way until we have a change of personnel on the court.
And as Chip was mentioning, it's such a long decision, 298 pages. It's going to take a while just to read through it, number one, but to digest and really interpret all the things that this will affect in law and constitutionality in this country. It's going to take a long time.
Well, we are still very much living in the Trumpian era, even if the former president did not get reelected, and may actually be in a bit of trouble for how he tried to prolong his term. But we're in the Trumpian era, and this is going to last quite some time until, again, there's a change of personnel on the court.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you were trying to read through this. We have been as well. We have the 200 pages plus on the desk here. I do want to point out something on page 69 that we made it to. It says, we do not pretend to know our political system or society, how our political system or society will respond to today's decision overruling Roe v. Wade. And even if we could foresee what would happen, we would have no authority to let that knowledge influence our decision. We can only do our job, which is to interpret the law, apply longstanding principles of stare decisis, and decide this case accordingly. And I'd like to comment there, is this normal to see the Supreme Court kind of talk about how society will respond to a case as they issue their opinion?
Yes and no. I think that it does happen. for instance, in the affirmative action decisions, when the court, the last time they looked at it, upheld an affirmative action program at Michigan, there was a forecast that this is something that would only be required for a certain number of years, and then it would no longer be required. So I think that they do kind of forecast what impact their decisions are going to have on society. But again, I think that this is an attempt to try to sound neutral when you get into the weeds of the analysis. This is not a neutral decision. The court says that abortion regulation is not sex-based discrimination. Although, last time I checked, the only people who can have abortions are women. So, and the reason why they don't want it to be considered to be sex-based discrimination is because then under their own precedent, they would be required to apply heightened scrutiny. What they've done in this case is they said all abortion regulation is subject to the lowest level of judicial scrutiny, which is rational basis. And under rational basis, almost anything can pass. Almost anything would pass muster constitutionally.
And this was such a bombshell decision today. We were just watching some video of some people by the Supreme Court arguing this is a very divided country already. This just seems like this will only further divide, you know, the population of this country. I mean, I have not seen this kind of division in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, it's very scary. I mean, coming on the heels of of the pandemic and then this explosion of mass shootings and street violence, and we've been through so much in the past few years, and this just really upsets the entire political system even more. And I really am very concerned about what will happen in the very near term. One good thing is that we do have an election coming up soon, and I think that I listened to the Speaker of the House earlier this morning. I think that with the election, usually in the midterm, it goes to the party out of power. I don't know if that's going to happen this time around. I don't know if people can trust the Republicans to govern.
Well, we talked about polling, but when they do polls on what's important to voters, economic issues far outweigh a decision like this on Roe v. Wade.
Right, and I think that's right. I think for the average person, the thing that they're focused on is bread and butter and how much we're all paying for gasoline and for food. But I think that, we have some issues that are transcendent issues about whether or not we're going to protect our democracy, whether we're going to protect our fundamental rights. I just really think that, economic prosperity and economic scarcity, it comes and goes with the ebb and flow of life, but these are decisions that will last for generations.
No, and I get that, but whenever there's an economic downturn like we're seeing now, and the people I talk to who are really hurting because the economy is suffering so badly, that's what they're concerned about, and the party in power is the one who's going to be blamed for it.
I think that's right. I think that's the normal course of events, but we are by no means in normal times, as
that's
you
true.
Point out yourself.
Well, and not just
These
that,
are not
but
normal times.
You look at the hearings going on in Congress right now with the January 6th insurrection, and I mean, there's stuff coming out of there that I never thought I'd see.
Right. No, I mean, I think that is a very real possibility that we may have an American president convicted of a felony. And I think that the nation will definitely be in shock at that point. We're not living through normal times. So the normal political calculus of voting on bread and butter issues and not much else, I just don't know if that's going to be the case this time around. But we'll see. I mean, that's just wondering what may happen. But I don't think that I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans are made to pay a price for this kind of overreach.
And we have just learned that CBS News does plan to have special coverage any moment now. President Joe Biden is expected to address the nation, of course, on this historic decision. So we just want to give you warning in case we cut you off to go to that. But while we still have you, I do want to talk about how easy or hard it will be legally to enforce some of the nuances of the abortion laws here in Louisiana. For example, the one that will penalize doctors who perform abortions on a woman if it's not for a reason other than to save her life. Is this going to make doctors afraid to say that a woman's life is at risk and that she needs an abortion?
Because what if somebody else disagrees with the opinion?
Right. Yeah. No. This puts doctors in a terrible position. It puts women in a terrible position. I mean, once a woman finds out that she's pregnant, in order for this law to work, there has to be a reporting duty, right? I mean, so what happens to those women who don't seek out maternal health care because they don't want to be pregnant, and they don't want the state to find out that they are pregnant? This is a terrible, terrible way to legislate, to tell people how to exercise their reproductive freedom. We need to give good examples to people, but to try to coerce people, I think, is the wrong way to go. But we're bound and determined now, it seems, as a state to try to force people to do things one way. And I think that it's going to lead to terrible consequences.
We're not the only state that's trying to do that. As we mentioned, Louisiana, one of 13 states that had trigger laws in place to make abortion illegal, which it is now in Louisiana and those 13 states. And then you had 26 states, so half of the country, saying they would either ban or restrict it in some way. So this is not a thing that is going to be just in our state.
And Louisiana has been very conservative for years.
That's true. And they're not only the trigger laws, they're also the zombie laws. So in states where, they had laws against abortion that were in place at the time Roe was decided, and then they were never taken off the books, those laws can now come back into force.
All right, Robert, thank you very much. We appreciate your insight.
Yes, Robert Wesley, thank you so much.
Getting us through this. We're going to now go over live to CBS News coverage in Washington. The president will be speaking in about 14 minutes. And you can keep up with all this on our website, our mobile app, and of course we'll have special coverage at 4, 5, 6, and 10 today.
Also potentially, I think, going to see the Department of Justice have to defend if President Biden does decide to go forward with an executive order, maybe saying that we're providing more funds to states for states to provide people to travel, then that could potentially violate the Hyde Amendment, which says no federal funding goes to funding abortions. And then we have, again, the Department of Justice having to step in and defend the federal government. So I think all of those things are on the table. You asked me about the main reasoning behind the majority opinion here. It really is that there's nothing in the Constitution that says the right to privacy or the right to an abortion. And so what do we have to do? We have to then look to history, we have to look to tradition, we have to look to precedent. And what the majority here said is, I don't see it. I don't see it under the text of the Constitution. I don't see it under history. I don't see it under precedent. That basically Roe just created out of thin cloth this idea that there's the right to obtain an abortion. Casey added to the problems of Roe, made that even worse. We've just exacerbated this, piling on problem on top of piling on problem. The concurrence is here really interesting. I would again point people to Justice Thomas's concurrence, where he says basically everything that's not written in the Constitution should be on the table for being in the chopping block. And then remarkably, we have the Chief Justice John Roberts, on his own, not getting anybody really to join this view that let's just uphold Mississippi's law, but let's not strike down Roe and Casey. This is no longer the Roberts Court. You don't need him after Justice Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court. You have 5 votes without him, and we saw saw that today.
On this point of travel, I know so many Americans are probably scratching their heads because freedom of movement is something that Americans believe in.
Yeah.
They can move from state to state. So this idea that you could restrict a person, a woman, from entering another state for whatever reason, it just does not seem
But can you,
plausible.
Rebecca? That's not legal. That's not legal, right? I mean, a person cannot be prosecuted for going to another state, doing something that's legal in that state, even if they're a citizen of another state, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, that is.
I'm sorry. If you follow me.
I mean, unless there are, implications for that first state. So it's not as simple as just, you have a certain state has a set of laws, and and a different state has a different set of laws. You could argue that some laws in some states affect the citizens of another state, and so therefore maybe there's some wiggle room. I mean, to me, it seems similar that I agree with you that those laws are problematic, and that the federal government, if it has the will, remember, I mean, we're in an administration that has the will to protect this. But if a new administration comes along that doesn't, I can't imagine that there would be much, enforcement. I mean, remember, to bring back a very old historical precedent, the slavery, slave catcher laws and so forth. I mean, this was litigated, and there are plenty of constitutional decisions on this issue.
The Dred Scott decision is the first that comes to mind.
Right.
And not only that, with what Justice Thomas is sort of like laying out on the table, I could just click off a number of issues that affect so many Americans right now who have been enjoying these freedoms.
Including Justice Thomas himself.
Including Justice Thomas himself.
Right, because, I mean, of course, Loving protected the right to intermarriage, and he,
and affirmative action. Justice Thomas also enjoyed that to a great extent.
Affirmative action, at least, is arguably more. There is some language in the Constitution that is arguably more addresses it, but of course, sure. And he himself is not in favor of those laws, as we know. But I think that we should pause and say, he was alone in writing that opinion, and not a single conservative justice signed on. And I personally think that there will be, that those constitutional opinions on contraception, on gay marriage, are not subject to being overturned due to this decision. And it's not because there isn't language in it that one might use, but rather because there's not the will. Right. And I think you can see that in the breakdown of the opinion. There's not the will. And so, when I see the dissent really saying, look, your reasoning would cover all of these decisions, it's in fact a kind of it's a counterpunch, because what the dissent is saying is, how can you reasonably distinguish these two things that I know you want to reasonably distinguish? And if you can't, it throws into question the very premise that your decision is mandated by the Constitution, which is the only ground on which the majority rests.
All right, Rebecca Roythe and Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. Please stand by. We're going to take a quick break, but our breaking news coverage of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade will continue next.
We should also note that we are awaiting the president, who is expected to speak soon, so stay with us. You're streaming CBS News, always on.
This is the moment for a brand new treatment for moderate to severe eczema. Cibinco, now FDA approved. 100% steroid free, not an injection. Cibinco is
eyes on the storm.
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data.
Real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
Up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts.
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
And live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan. Only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10. We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strange shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncover the truth.
An investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strange has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse.
We follow the story wherever it leads.
Guilty on all counts.
We'll keep telling the story because you deserve to know.
I want all the science nerds out there to know I am with you. And I was able to make a career out of it and take a passion and turn it into a job.
Chasing down a rainbow.
Science and weather has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Rocks and minerals.
Having the right to choose. The hypocrisy is raging, but the harm is endless. What this means to women is such an insult. It's a slap in the face to women about using their own judgment to make their own decisions about their reproductive freedom.
And that was Speaker Nancy Pelosi's reaction to today's historic ruling from the Supreme Court. The conservative majority has overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling, which had established the right to an abortion in America.
In a 6-3 ruling, the court's conservative justices said Roe was wrong from the beginning and access to abortion should be handled at the state level. With the decision, 26 states will or are likely to restrict abortion access. Some even have trigger laws which ban abortions immediately upon the court's decision. CBS News political contributor Sean Sullivan joins us now. He's also the deputy politics editor for campaigns at the Washington Post. I wanted to pick up on what Speaker Pelosi said and that statement she put out. She says, quote, "The rights of women and all Americans are on the ballot this November. So is abortion going to be Democrats' new central focus for the midterms?"
Well, it seems pretty clear from the statements that we have seen, at least in the early going so far today, that that is something that Democrats do want to run on. They see this as an issue that can energize not only their base, but an issue that they could use to appeal to moderate voters, to voters in swing areas, to women, to men, to voters across the board. And even before this decision came down today, we have seen Democrats talk about this a lot more than Republicans have talked about, at least in a political context, at least in a campaign context. And so the early indications, at least from what we're hearing today from Speaker Pelosi, from candidates, Democratic candidates for Senate, for House, for other races, it's very clear down the early going that they are looking to use this as a sharp point of contrast in these midterm elections. And I think we're seeing this virtually across the board right now.
And you brought up Republicans, Sean. So how are Republicans reacting to this decision politically? Because as we know from polling, the majority of Americans still support a woman's right to get an abortion. And we know, even in not too distant history, even a lot of Republicans said that they supported this, right? This hasn't always been a blanket Republican position. So how are they reacting to this decision politically? Are they a little worried about, down ballot contests, considering that now this fight is essentially being moved to those down ballot contests?
Right, and this now becomes a state-by-state issue. I think there has been, for some time now, concern among Republicans about what the political fallout could be in these midterm elections, from Senate races to House races to state-level races. As for the Republican response today, we have seen some Republicans praise this decision. I would point to Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, who, every time he speaks, he chooses his words carefully, and you often see him try to set a tone, not just for Senate Republicans, but for Republicans who are running for the Senate. And he called this, a historic victory. But the question now is, how much do Republicans want to talk about this? Their midterm blueprint has been centered very, very heavily in inflation, in rising gas prices, in the rise in violent crime that we've seen. They are really, really trying to run on those issues, and on top of that, tap into President Biden's unpopularity and a feeling that we're seeing across the country among many Americans, and this feeling's reflected in polls and focus groups and elsewhere, that they're just not happy with Democratic leadership right now, Democratic control of the White House, Democratic control of Congress. And so I think the fear that some Republicans have and have expressed in recent months is that, does a decision like this then change the landscape? Does it change the sort of order of operations when voters walk into the ballot booth, this year? What is going to be the top of mind issue? Is it going to be the high price of gas, or is it going to be the Supreme Court decision? Is it going to be crime, or is it going to be the Supreme Court and abortion rights more generally? And so I think that some Republicans look at this and they say, okay, there was a path, politically speaking at least, that they felt very, very confident about walking down that would lead, in their view, to winning back the House and possibly winning back control of the Senate. And I think now it's less certain. And so it's definitely worth watching how Republicans talk about this issue, because we've seen them before try to strike a balance, try to say, look, this is the right thing, I agree with this, but my state, in some cases you hear Republicans say this, my state has laws on the books, it's established, I'm not going to argue against that. So it'll be really interesting to see, how Republicans deal with this, and I think that'll be really telling about their strategy.
All right, Sean, thank you so much. We're going to bring in now Jennifer Popik. She's the Legislative Director for the National Right to Life Committee. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. First, we have to ask your reaction to this ruling.
Oh, this is a great day for unborn children. This is the culmination of 50 years of effort. I stand on the shoulders of other people who came before me, and this is just a wonderful day for mothers, for their unborn children. We're extremely excited.
And Jennifer, as you know, several states, over a dozen, have preemptively codified abortion access, ahead of the Supreme Court decision. Do you think that those laws should now be challenged?
In terms of challenge, what this decision means is that this, again, becomes a debate that goes to states. And so some states are going to, spring into law or enact, protective laws for unborn children, and other states are going to allow abortion on demand. And I think this is uncharted territory, but we know that this is going to be something that's going to be, up to people and their elected representatives, state by state. Congress will also have a role. So we know some states will permit abortion and others are going to protect unborn children. And, it's going to be a process that plays out here over the next coming weeks and months.
To that point, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she believes Republicans will work to ban abortion access if they do take control of the House and the Senate. Is this something your organization is in favor of, or should it remain up to the voters of those individual states?
Oh, certainly there's going to be a role for both. I mean, the states are going to be the most immediate place that these laws can take effect. I think we're a far ways, no matter the outcome of this election, Republicans are, predicted to regain majorities, and we're, going to work hard to hope, to make sure that that's the case. There's going to be hurdles. In the Senate, it requires 60 votes to pass anything. And the Democrats have put out the very radical Women's Health Protection Act, knowing this decision was coming, and did not even achieve 50 votes on it. So it's going to be a tall order, particularly in the Senate.
And now that your organization has achieved this victory, Jennifer, are you going to work towards, shoring up resources in these states for pregnant women who may be, who may need the help, who would have otherwise perhaps had the abortion? Are you going to work on creating those resources that are so needed?
The safety net. The safety net,
yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's something that we've been, working on. It hasn't gotten a great deal of attention, but certain states, to the tune of, tens of millions of dollars, the Texas alternatives. There's the Emma Act that we're working to promote in certain states, the Every Mom Matters Act. We absolutely know it's more critical now than ever to connect moms with the resources they're going to need. This is going to be, uncharted territory, and I think it's going to be one we're going to find loving arms in pro-lifers and in care centers that have long been around, and we're going to work to enhance those resources, certainly.
Jennifer, part of the criticism has been that organizations like yours have focused their effort on unborn children. What happens to them once those children are born? What resources are given to them from birth on through their education, their early education, preschool care, their food resources. There are a number of issues on the table because we're dealing with a number of states that just are already stretched from a social standpoint on the monies that come in. Mississippi comes to mind, Louisiana, Alabama. What other, I mean, you mentioned Texas. I'm curious, in those states specifically, what are some of where have you made strides there when children are born into poverty?
Certainly what we're trying to work on going forward now with every piece of legislation, we're going to try to include an expansion of resources that are available in that state for healthcare, for the sorts of things that you're talking about. We're going to look at more options going forward. And there's also a huge array of federal resources. And I know that certain members of Congress have been extremely interested in, the Republicans have been interested in highlighting not only the existing resources that are out there between everything from the CHIP program to WIC to early childhood education, but to, expanding some of these resources. I think, this is just the beginning. And so we know that these resources are going to need to be connected to the moms and to these babies and support them as they grow. So, it's going to be a priority for us going forward. And it has been, and I think there's a huge interest in making it a strong priority.
There's a new effort to concentrate on that.
Right, absolutely. Jennifer Popick, we thank you so much for joining us and giving us your perspective as well.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to take a short break. Our breaking news coverage of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade will continue next.
And we are, of course, awaiting the president, who is expected to speak soon. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News, always on.
When you need eyes on the storm,
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
the Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data,
real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts,
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
and live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10. We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strain shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncover the truth.
An investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse.
We follow the story wherever it leads.
Guilty on all counts.
We'll keep telling the story because you deserve to know.
I want all the science nerds out there to know I am with you. And I was able to make a career out of it and take a passion and turn it into a job.
Chasing down a rainbow.
Science and weather has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Rocks and minerals, I had a rock collection as a kid, and I love space. I was blessed enough to be able to do that in my hometown and at WWL-TV.
We don't just break the news. We make sure your voice is heard.
We want to know that the water we're paying for is safe to drink and is safe to bathe.
Overturn Roe versus Wade, eliminating the constitutional right to abortion. Here's the president.
It's not hyperbole to suggest a very solemn moment. Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans, but they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected a woman's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, a right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter that drew a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faiths and backgrounds found acceptable, and that have been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today. And it was a constitutional principle upheld by justices appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision, written by a justice appointed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. In the 5 decades that followed Roe v. Wade, justices appointed by Republican presidents from Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, George W. Bush, were among the justices who voted to uphold the principles set forth in Roe v. Wade. It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view. The court has done what it has never done before, expressly take away a constitutional right that is so fundamental to so many Americans that had already been recognized. The court's decision to do so will have real and immediate consequences. State laws banning abortion are automatically taking effect today, jeopardizing the health of millions of women, some without exceptions. So extreme that women could be punished for protecting their health. So extreme that women and girls who are forced to bear their rapist's child, with the child a consequence. It just stuns me. So extreme that doctors will be criminalized for fulfilling their duty to care. Imagine having a young woman have to carry a child of incest as a consequence of incest. No option. Too often the case. The poor women are going to be hit the hardest. It's cruel. In fact, the court laid out state laws criminalizing abortion that go back to the 1800s as rationale. The court literally taking America back 150 years. This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. Let me be very clear and unambiguous. The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose, the balance that existed, is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law. No executive action from the president can do that. And if Congress, as it appears, lacks the votes to do that now, voters need to make their voices heard. This fall, we must elect more senators and representatives who will codify women's right to choose into federal law once again. Elect more state leaders to protect this right at the local level. We need to restore the protections of Roe as law of the land. We need to elect officials who will do that. This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot. Until then, I will do all of my power to protect a woman's right in states where they will face the consequences of today's decision. While the court's decision cast a dark shadow over a large swath of the land, many states in this country still recognize a woman's right to choose. So, if a woman lives in a state that restricts abortion, the Supreme Court's decision does not prevent her from traveling from her home state to the state that allows it. It does not prevent a doctor in that state from treating her. As the Attorney General has made clear, women must remain free to travel safely to another state to seek care they need. My administration will defend that bedrock right. If any state or local official, high or low, tries to interfere with a woman's exercising her basic right to travel, I will do everything in my power to fight that deeply un-American attack. My administration will also protect a woman's access to medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, like contraception, which is essential for preventative health care, mifepristone, which the FDA approved 20 years ago to safely end early pregnancies and is commonly used to treat miscarriages. Some states are saying that they'll try to ban or severely restrict access to these medications. But extremist governors and state legislators are looking to block the mail or search a person's medicine cabinet or control a woman's actions by tracking data on her apps she uses are wrong and extreme and out of touch with the majority of Americans. The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists wrote to me and Vice President Harris stressing that these laws are not based on evidence and asking us to act to protect access to care. They say by limiting access to these medicines, maternal mortality will climb in America. That's what they say. Today, I'm directing the Department of Health and Human Services to take steps to ensure these critical medications are available to the fullest extent possible. And the politicians cannot interfere in the decisions that should be made between a woman and her doctor. And my administration will remain vigilant as the implications of this decision play out. I've warned about how this decision risks the broader right to privacy for everyone. That's because Roe recognized the fundamental right to privacy that has served as a basis for so many more rights that we've come to take for granted, that are ingrained in the fabric of this country. The right to make the best decisions for your health. The right to use birth control, a married couple in the privacy of their bedroom, for God's sake. The right to marry the person you love. Now, Justice Thomas said as much today. He explicitly called to reconsider the right of marriage equality, the right of couples to make their choices on contraception. This is extreme and dangerous path the court is now taking us on. Let me close with 2 points. First, I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech. We must stand against violence in any form, regardless of your rationale. Second, I know so many of us are frustrated and disillusioned that the court has taken something away that's so fundamental. I know so many women are now going to face incredibly difficult situations. I hear you. I support you. I stand with you. The consequences and the consensus of the American people, core principles of equality, liberty, dignity, and the stability of the rule of law demand that Roe should not have been overturned. With this decision, The conservative majority of the Supreme Court shows how extreme it is, how far removed they are from the majority of this country. They've made the United States an outlier among developed nations in the world. But this decision must not be the final word. My administration will use all of its appropriate lawful powers, but Congress must act. And with your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over. Thank you very much. I have more to say this in weeks to come. Thank you.
Well, there you have the President of the United States calling this a sad day for the court and the country, pledging to do everything in his power to protect women's health. He said now, with Roe gone, let's be clear, the health and life of women are now at risk. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, what actions can the president take?
Well, we only heard him give one actual specific in that speech, Nora. He said that he's going to be directing the Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that abortion pills are more widely available, particularly to women who live in states where abortion is now illegal. What he did not say is whether he is going to push the FDA to drop restrictions that currently limit the number of pharmacies that can provide those abortion pills. He didn't announce any new executive orders. Doesn't mean that those won't happen in the days to come, but he didn't lay out any specific plan right now to do things like issue travel vouchers to women so that if they need to go 1,000 miles to get an abortion, it can be a little cheaper for them. He didn't talk about giving service members time off if they live in a state that doesn't allow abortions and they need to travel. So there are going to be a lot of questions on the minds of abortion rights activists about just how far he is willing to go personally. He says he's going to do everything that he can. He called this ruling an extreme ideology and a tragic error, but we're still waiting for some of those details to be filled in, Nora.
And Nancy, the president also making the case that this decision is not the final word. He said that Congress should act, they could act, but he also said, with your vote, you can act, and laying out the case that this will be a central issue in the upcoming midterm elections.
Right, very explicitly laying out a midterm election message saying that the only way to secure women's rights is for Congress to make the right to an abortion a federal law. And he said, we don't have the votes to do that right now. Democrats don't. And so if people care about that, they need to vote in November and elect pro-abortion rights candidates at every level, at the state level and at the national level. And that is an argument that you're already hearing today, Nora, not just from the President of the United States, from the Speaker of the House and virtually every Democrat that has spoken so far.
Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thank you. Also want to bring in Jan Crawford because you heard him mention Justice Clarence Thomas's singular dissent in which he said that he wanted to reconsider marriage equality and contraception, playing out what the furthest right or conservative opinion on the court was saying this should go further.
Right, and Justice Thomas has always been the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court. He is the one who is willing to completely disregard precedent on a number of cases where other conservative justices are not. And if you look at the majority opinion, which has 5 justices supporting their view, Thomas was the only one who thinks that. The other 4, he doesn't have the votes. The other 4 say, no, it does not. We could not be more clear. These other issues are not implicated. The right to contraception, the right to same-sex marriage, those are not implicated because abortion is different. It involves a fetal life. And so there is actually an extensive analysis kind of bulked up from that initial draft that we saw where the majority is saying, no, we don't agree with that. And Thomas writes separately, but he's only writing for himself.
Jen Crawford, thank you. Also want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, who is there at the Supreme Court, which is a fortress with security, but also a number of protests. Major?
So, Nora, I've talked to protesters on both sides of this issue this morning since the landmark ruling was released, and they both use the same phrase. This is an earthquake. And if so, this judicial earthquake has created a fault line right here on First Street in front of the Supreme Court, where those interested in this opinion have come in much larger numbers since it was handed down at 10-10 Eastern Time this morning. I would say the crowd is at least 3 or 4 times larger than it was then. Some of those are curiosity seekers, but some are deeply emotionally involved in this issue. I see tears on both sides. Those who've long opposed abortion rights, tears of joy, tears of gratitude. Those who support abortion rights, bitter tears of anguish and anger about what the Supreme Court has done. One of the embedded ironies in this large and ever-growing assemblage of Americans coming this moment in front of the Supreme Court, if you read the opinion today, the Supreme Court said, don't come here anymore. The Supreme Court has nothing more to say on abortion because the Supreme Court no longer recognizes it as a constitutional right worthy of commentary. Go back to your states, go back to your local community. Well, they're not doing it here, nor they're coming in ever larger numbers.
Excellent point, Major Garrett, who's there outside the Supreme Court for us today. The president also calling for peaceful protests after the Supreme Court has struck down Roe versus Wade. The president saying no intimidation, violence is never acceptable. Our coverage will continue on CBS News streaming, your local news, and we'll have a full wrap-up tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.
You need eyes on the storm.
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data.
Real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
Up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts.
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
And live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan. Only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10.
We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strain shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncover the truth.
An investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse.
We follow the story wherever it leads.
Guilty on all counts.
We'll keep telling the story because you deserve to know.
I want all the science nerds out there to know I am with you. And I was able to make a career out of it and take a passion and turn it into a job.
Chasing down a rainbow.
Science and weather has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Rocks and minerals, I had a rock collection as a kid, and I love space. I was blessed enough to be able to do that in my hometown and at WWL-TV.
We don't just break the news. We make sure your voice is heard.
We want to know that the water we're paying for is safe to drink and is safe to bathe in.
We hold the powerful accountable. The question is, are the changes going to be made or not? We get results.
Residents in East St. Tammany Parish are getting a $23 million upgrade to their water system.
You can trust the Eyewitness investigators. We'll keep telling the story.
Hi, Mr. Franklin. I just want to thank you. You were right on the tornado that was coming onshore in the Big Branch Marsh, and that storm eventually walloped me pretty good. If I had not been watching you and you had not been letting me know how close that storm was to me, I would